cut away and thrown overboard, though far too much of it still remained, and on several ships there was a dangerous quantity of carved ornamental wood on the upper works, much of it all the more inflammable because it was gilded and lacquered in bright colours which it was the practice to clean with oiled rags. The thin steel roofs of barbettes and the shields of many of the guns had been removed, as the Tsi Yuen's experiences in the fight with the Naniwa Kan had shown that such light steel did not keep out the shells of the Japanese quick firers, but served only to ensure their bursting with deadly effect. Sometimes a gun shield had burst a shell, which if there had been no such attempt at protection would perhaps have passed harmlessly over the heads of the gunners. Round the barbettes of the ships, sacks of coal were stacked as an emergency method of strengthening these defences. Of coal the fleet had in abundance, but it was woefully short of ammunition, and much of what was on board was old and defective. If Ting had had more professional knowledge and training he would have been more anxious as to the probable result of a battle. Where were Admiral Ito and the Japanese fleet? Early in August he had crossed the Yellow Sea with his cruiser squadron, and shown himself before Port Arthur and Wei Hai Wei. He drew the fire of the seaward forts at long range, and replied with a few shots, but he made no attack. He was engaged only in a reconnaissance, and was quite satisfied when he ascertained that the Chinese ships were remaining in harbour. He then returned to the Korean side of the Yellow Sea, and till nearly the middle of September was employed in escorting the convoys of transports from Japan, and protecting the disembarkation of the reinforcements they were bringing to Korea. On Friday, 14 September, the same day on which the Chinese convoy with the reinforcements for Manchuria left Taku, Ito had completed his work in connection with the transport of Japanese troops, having landed the last detachments at Chinempo in the estuary of the Ta Tung River. Higher up the river, General Nadzu's army was attacking the Chinese walled town of Pingyang. Ito sent his gunboats up the Ta Tung to cooperate with Nadzu, and leaving his torpedo boats at the river mouth, went to sea with his fleet. He steered for the mouth of the Yalu River, intending to reconnoitre the Chinese positions there, and obtain information as to the reported concentration of troops near the river mouth, but under the belief that the enemy's fleet was still at Port Arthur, Admiral Ting was just as ignorant of his enemy's position and movements. Early on the morning of Monday, 17 September, he had expended some ammunition in practice at floating targets off the mouth of the Yalu. The fleet had then anchored, and the men were given a rest while the cooks got dinner ready. This was about 11 a.m. A little later there was unexpected news that interrupted the cooking. The lookouts at the mastheads of the anchored fleet reported that the smoke of many steamers was rising above the horizon far away to the southwestward. It was a bright sunny day, with a perfectly smooth sea, clear air, and a blue sky, and the lookout men could easily make out that the smoke rising above the skyline came from a long line of funnels. Admiral Ting had no doubt it was the Japanese fleet, and he gave orders to weigh anchor and clear for action. Early that morning Admiral Ito had heard from coasting craft that the Chinese fleet was at sea, and one trader retailed to him a rumour that the fleet was anchored behind Hai Yang Island, where there was a sheltered roadstead. But on reaching Hai Yang he found only a few fishing boats lying behind the island. He continued his voyage towards the Yalu, now anticipating a meeting with Ting, unless the Chinese admiral had already run down the other coast of the bay, and so passed him at a distance during the previous night. Ito's fleet was steaming in line ahead, and was organized in 2 squadrons. The van squadron was led by his second in command, Admiral Tsuboi, who had hoisted his flag on the fast cruiser Yoshino. After her in succession came the cruisers Takachiko, Akitsushima, and Naniwa Kan. Then there was a considerable interval between the van squadron and the leading ship of the main squadron, the cruiser Matsushima, flying Count Ito's flag. Next to her came the armoured cruiser Chiyoda, and then the Matsushima's 2 sister ships, the cruisers Ikitsushima and Hashidate. The 4 ships of the van squadron and the 4 leading ships of the main squadron represented the chief strength of Ito's fleet, his 8 modern cruisers. After them came the 2 old ironclads Hiei and Fuso, the gunboat Akagi, and the small armed merchant steamer Saikyo Maru. The long line of warships steaming swiftly through the sunlight must have looked more like a fleet arrayed for some festive occasion than squadrons prepared for imminent battle, for every ship was painted a brilliant white, with the gilded device of the chrysanthemum forming a broad golden shield on her bows, and the red and white sun flag of Japan flew from every masthead. At 11:30, half an hour after the Chinese had perceived the approach of the Japanese fleet, the Yoshino, which was leading the advancing line of the van squadron, signalled that there was a dense mass of black smoke on the horizon inshore. This was the smoke produced by Ting's furnaces, as his ships hurriedly stoked their fires to get full pressure on the boilers. Then the Chinese fleet was seen coming out and forming in line of battle. End of chapter 12, part 1. Recording by Nick Number.